Welcome to our second podcast, Coffee Time with the AHK Vietnam. I'm Chang Dao, Marketing and Communication Manager at the AHK Vietnam. And welcome to the China Plus One, Vietnam as an attractive alternative to China. Special guests today are Mr. Bjoern Koslowski, Deputy Chief of AHK Vietnam, a part of the global German chamber networks, supporting German companies with establishing and extending business relations in 92 countries and 140 locations. Ms. Lê Hanh, consulting expert of AHK Vietnam. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Hello.
Hello everyone.
So we are recording this at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and I have to confess that I already drank my last coffee for today.
Yeah, actually it's Friday afternoon, so I don't have any coffee with me, but I have a cup of tea.
So much for coffee time with AHK, huh?
So we should call some kind of relaxing time with the AHK Vietnam. And even that we can talk about business. So let's discuss on the new business direction called China Plus One. Bjoern Koslowski, what makes German companies decide to diversify their risk and reassess their activities in China?
So yes, we definitely see that many companies are currently reassessing their activities in China with the goal of diversifying their risks. And these risks basically emanate from the fact that many German companies have all or many of their holdings, of their production holdings, for example, or of their sourcing activities currently located solely in China. And they're now taking a look beyond China. And a major motivation we think plays a role here is that emerging countries in Southeast Asia, but also in other parts of the world, of course, have improved their competitiveness during the past few years. And Vietnam actually is a very good example for successful reforms and activities to improve their competitiveness. And so while many other countries are now improving their competitiveness, there are also developments in China that play a major role. We had a few sudden shocks during the past few years. For example, in 2019, we had the U.S. China trade war, which showed how fickle trade relations really can be and what kind of impact a conflict might have on supply chains. Now in 2020, we of course see the COVID-19 crisis. When it all started out, we had major challenges with the Chinese companies supplying their German customers, for example. And this is of course making companies rethink the supply chains and also investments in China and in Asia Pacific in general. Then, of course, we also have rising labor costs in China. I think it's quite obvious that China is developing and that many other countries, also Vietnam, of course, offering lower labor costs. And this is all leading to diversification efforts now. Yeah? So German companies do want to be less dependent on the Chinese market. They want to diversify their risks. And as a consequence, they are reassessing their supply network. And this can take the form of them shifting their foreign direct investments, at least partly, beyond China and into other countries in the region. And on the sourcing side, they are, of course, also rethinking their current strategies and expand their supply network beyond China.
So it's all about rising cost, increasing regulation, and tariff avoidance. How are Vietnam's competitive advantages evolving? And is the low labor cost the essential indicator, or Vietnam could offer more than that?
I've been living here for 5 years, and I'm actually quite fascinated by the country and also convinced by its many key competitive advantages. But there, I think, are three main reasons why Vietnam succeeds into attracting a lot of FDI and sourcing projects. So we already talked about labor and labor costs. But it's not just that regarding labor. So many companies that invest here or that do business with the Vietnamese, they are also very convinced by the HR quality. Yeah? So Vietnam is culturally very similar to China. Many companies have already worked with China. And so Vietnam also knows Confucian values, for example. People are very determined to have a drive for success. Some say they want to get rich in this life, yeah, and so they are typically very industrious, and that's of course something that especially Germans like a lot in people. So also, the learning motivation of Vietnamese is considered very high. So if you show them a process, they will fulfill it in the way that you want it to be fulfilled. Quality here is typically quite high. So these are all things that play a role here. Then the second key competitive advantage would be Vietnam's geographical location. So if you take a look at the map, the country has a very long coastline of about 3,400 kilometers. It lies right in between the manufacturing and center of the whole Asia Pacific region, China, and also its biggest market, China, and also ASEAN. So if you produce goods here, if you source goods here, you can ship them out quite fast to your target markets. Yeah, and then the third key competitive advantage is surely the open investment environment that we have here. The Vietnamese government for a few years now has worked very strongly on opening the market to foreign investors, especially. So it is possible for most cases to open up 100% daughter companies of foreign entities here in Vietnam. You do not necessarily need a partner here if you don't want to. This is very positive. Vietnam's tax regulations are very competitive. For example, the CIT currently stands at 20%, which is second lowest in ASEAN, right next to Singapore. Yeah. So these are the three key competitive advantages. But we, of course, have also contact to many German companies that want to invest here. And maybe, Hanh, you can tell us a bit more about two examples that we have from German companies that wanted to invest here.
Yes, Bjoern, I have here two examples of German companies who have chosen Vietnam as a manufacturing location. The first company is active in the textile industry and was severely affected by the U.S. China trade dispute. They have two production sites in China, and their products are mostly exported to the US. After US imposed an extra 25% tariff on top of the regular rate, this company needs to find another location and relocate their production site as soon as possible. In this sense, Vietnam is a perfect choice for them, as their suppliers are also relocating into Vietnam. And for the second company, at the moment, they only have location sites in China, and they really want to diversify their holdings. Therefore, they have been looking for alternatives in Southeast Asia, with Vietnam being a prime destination.
In 2018, the trade conflict began, and now we are all talking about Corona crisis. We have been experiencing how coronavirus affect the global economy, but some experts even see the chance for Vietnam, as under these circumstances, the implementation process of these China +1 trendings will be accelerated. Many U.S. manufacturers are shifting production to countries outside China to avoid the U.S. tariffs. Japanese government has announced lately on the billion U.S. financial support for the Japanese company in moving their productions and supply chains back to Japan or to the other countries like Vietnam. So how do you see this movement?
So we already talked about the influence of COVID-19 on existing German investments here in Vietnam in the podcast of last week, right? So today we will only talk about new FDI, so upcoming FDI projects and upcoming sourcing projects. And you have to see that the trade war did not really affect most German FDI plans or sourcing plans here in Vietnam directly, because most German companies located in China use it as a basis to supply their European or Asian holdings. They're not that focused on China. So I think, Hanh, you just mentioned one of the company examples. One of those had to do with the USA, but it was an exemption, I would say, not a typical example. And then regarding COVID-19, Hanh, I think you have contact to a few customers who actually have to change their plans here in Vietnam because of the current crisis.
Yes, Bjoern. The COVID-19 pandemic did have a big impact to the German FDI in Vietnam. Many companies need to change their plans. There are two trends that I can see. Either they need to postpone the business expanding in Vietnam until next year, or they need to get on the fast track as soon as possible to diversify their holdings and mitigate country risk.
Overall, I would see that many companies are now seeing an increased cluster risk or Klumpenrisiko in German because of their overexposure to China. In this context, you really have to say that the trade war has shown how fickle trade relations can be. The exchange of goods between Europe and China could potentially be affected by a few political decisions, right? So with the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, we cannot yet see a clear path or directions. We had a few inquiries regarding reassessments, but it was not that much. We see that on the one hand, many suppliers in China will now probably have less orders in their books. So this could mean that they lower their prices. The Purchase Manager Index in China has just been released. It's been very low, so they are lowering prices. In fact, this could mean that in the short term, the COVID-19 crisis could actually stimulate further sourcing activities in Vietnam, at least in the short term. However, in the long run, we see that Vietnam will most likely stand to win a lot of additional sourcing and FDI projects.
Final question. Let's give us your expectation in the future of the German business activities in Vietnam for the long run.
Sourcing and FDI are currently really strongly affected by the China +1 tendencies. However, this is not the only trend that we are seeing. So beginning in summer 2020, we will hopefully see the EU-Vietnam free trade agreement coming into force. And this should be a further boom to business activities between Vietnam and Germany. Hanh, maybe you can tell us a bit more about customs tariffs within the EVFTA.
Yes, Bjoern. The EVFTA includes intensive and comprehensive commitments covering many fields of economy, trade, investment, and sustainable development issues. After the EVFTA takes effect, over 70% of all tariff lines will be eliminated, and the remaining will be gradually phased out. After 10 years, up to 99% of all tariff lines will be free of custom duty. That's a very great, right? And furthermore, there are also commitments in services, public procurement, non-tariff barriers, export duty, and a good regulatory package.
So the segment that is standing to gain the most certainly is sourcing. Because this is most of the business that we have between Vietnam and Europe. We expect that Vietnam's export portfolio to Europe and to Germany, of course, will branch out. Currently, the best sellers, so to say, in trade between Europe and Vietnam are certainly agricultural produce, garments and shoes, as well as OEM electronics such as phones, for example, from Samsung. However, these, I would say, traditional export goods will be there will be some additions to these. So in the future, we expect more exports from Vietnam to Europe, for example, in terms of metal products. This is a trend we already see since 2018. Furniture, processed food, and also electronics supplies.
Yes, but on the other hand, I think FDI will not profit as much from the EVFTA because many investments are serving only local or regional markets. Nevertheless, China +1 is still an important factor, and we expect more investment in the automotive supplying industry, textile supplies, as well as electronic supplies. These are very crucial for Vietnam, as they bring a lot of value add to the country, and in contrast to the OEM business that is currently dominating much of the FDI landscape here in Vietnam.
So overall, we do not expect Vietnam to supplant China as a manufacturing location. For most German companies, the Chinese market is very important. It is one of the biggest markets worldwide, not just a workbench, so to say. And Vietnam is, of course, comparatively small if compared to China. With a population of 100 million, Vietnam's population is about the same size as the population of Guangdong province in China. However, we believe that Vietnam can be a good addition to activities in China. The culture of both countries is pretty similar, although both countries are geographically very close. With a long overland border, you can do overland transports from northern Vietnam to the Pearl River Delta, for example. Otherwise, you just ship within a few days. all of the benefits that we described before also apply, of course. The key competitive advantages of Vietnam are obvious. And for these reasons, we believe that there will be a substantial increase in sourcing activities of German companies here in Vietnam. And of course, regarding FDI, we will also see a steady inflow of new German manufacturing activities here in Vietnam. Naturally, I would almost say this will not have the same magnitude as investments from Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Nevertheless, German companies will surely bring a lot of know-how into this country. Yeah, we, as an AHK, we support many companies here in Vietnam with activities in German-style vocational education, for example. The German companies typically bring a lot of added value with them. Yeah. They also try to source a lot of parts here in Vietnam, if possible. And most German companies, you can believe that, I think you can believe us because we're handling German customers every day. They are thinking very long term, and the investments German companies do are also very long term. So most German companies that come here, they will be here to stay.
Bjoern Koslowski, Deputy Chief Representative of the AHK Vietnam, and Hanh, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast of AHK Vietnam, and thanks to everyone watching here online today. Please join us next week with the topic Free Trade Agreement between the EU and Vietnam, and how German businesses benefit from this, together with our exciting guest on Friday, the 22nd of May. Once again, thank you so much. To hear more interviews, please visit us at vietnam.ahk.de or follow us on our channels.